Welcome back to the Shared Practices podcast. We are deep into season 2. We are talking about finding the ideal practice to buy and going through that whole transition process. So George did a method of finding a practice where he analyzed the ideal demographics. And so, George, you've got your opinion and your method, and we get another method. And that's one of the favorite things about this show to me, is that we're getting different ways to do the same thing. So which method do you think is better, George?
Mine.
This isn't fair. We haven't even listened to the episode yet. And you're slightly biased, but I thought this was awesome. I thought Jordan Thomas, who we have on today, Dr. Jordan Thomas, crushed it. So describe for our listeners a little bit, just kind of a glimpse of how it's different than your way.
Well, obviously with any two things, there's similarities and differences. And, he looks at a lot of the same metrics I do. He just looked at them at the entire state level. And then he sends mailers to, like 1,000 dentists and finds himself a great opportunity. And, I think he definitely has a very viable way. And I think the reason why I really wanted to have him on is because for a lot of our listeners, I think this is more repeatable than maybe my method.
Yeah, yours required a degree of insanity that not everyone is willing to bring to the table. And you're also just a little bit jealous because he got access to his demographics so much easier. You had to do everything from scratch. And you're like, wait, how did you get this? And he's like, yeah, it was just there. And you're like, what? I sweated and toiled for hours to figure out these ratios and everything. So you're just jealous.
Yeah, he did it all. He did it all more efficiently than I did. But, again, two different methods, one same great result.
Cool.
Well, definitely impressive.
And I think at one point, I don't know if it was him or you, did you walk outside? I heard birds chirping.
Yeah, I think Jordan went for a stroll.
Okay.
And I think we need some more wildlife in these episodes.
Yeah.
So, definitely great birds chirping today. If you hear it, just allow it to happen and let it relax you. And it's a definitely great addition.
Maybe we'll try and capture that from this track and we'll add it into the background of future episodes just to make it a little more consistent for everyone.
Exactly. I love it.
Okay, cool. Well, here we go. Dr. Jordan Thomas.
I'm very excited. I have with me today Dr. Jordan Thomas. Jordan Thomas is actually an individual from North Carolina, and he did something very similar to what I did. If you listen to Season 2, Episode 9 of this podcast, I talked to Dr. Richard Lowe, my co-host, about my process of how I found a practice and the whole thing that I went through to find a deal that I was really happy with. And come to find out that there's an individual across the country that I had no idea about, Dr. Jordan Thomas, who went through a very similar process, a different way, and he found an opportunity that he's very happy about. And so I'm happy to have Jordan Thomas on the podcast today, and he's going to talk about how he found a practice off market without a broker, and hopefully we can give you guys some tips. How are you doing today, Jordan?
Good. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, and where you went to school and everything.
Yeah, so originally from Northeast Ohio, just moved down to North Carolina for dental school. So my wife and I have been here since 2013. I have a bachelor's in business administration. Dental school was not the plan at all for a really long time, and got my undergrad degree, took a year off, and I just worked. I was an insurance consultant, and I kind of focused in on that for a year. And then decided to go back to school. And so I had to go back and do the prereq. So I'm a few years behind the normal person, if you will, who kind of just went into dental school right out. But the experience and the schooling and the sales experience that I got from insurance consulting, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I think it's been awesome. So my wife's a dental hygienist. So she went to hygiene school up in the Northeast. And she's been practicing hygiene full-time down here, kind of being my little sugar mama, helping me get through school. So here we are.
And you went to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill?
Yes. So I apologize. So I went to Kent State. My undergrad degree is from Kent State, and I did prereqs at Cleveland State to get into dental school. And then dental school was at, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
Okay, so you're at North Carolina, Chapel Hill. When did you decide that you wanted to pursue some sort of ownership or shortly after dental school?
So as I had mentioned, I have a business degree. Since probably like the age of 11 or 12, I have a distinct memory of my uncle sitting down with myself and my two cousins over dinner, and he was just kind of giving us the basics of business. And he kind of just explained, if you have a shoebox and you put money into that shoebox, that's income or revenue, and money going out of that shoebox is expenses. As long as you have more income or more money going into the shoebox and going out, you're going to be successful. And my uncle and my grandpa owned pretty prominent manufacturing company in our hometown. And just as long as I can remember, I've been interested in business. So actually, when I considered going back to school to do something different other than insurance consulting, because the plan was for me to do that till the markets kind of changed, Obamacare happened, and I was from a pretty deprived area in Northeast Ohio. When I started looking to go back to school, I knew I wanted to do something that would have the business side as well. So if it didn't have the opportunity for business, it was non-negotiable. So in a sense, dental school was a business decision. So I knew from a very early age, and then from the very beginning, thinking about dental school, that practice ownership was where I needed to go.
I've never heard it that way. I've always heard kind of like, for my case, I started dental school and then decided to dive into business. You picked dental school because it allowed you to be a business owner. I like that.
Yes.
And so you just graduated from North Carolina, correct?
I did about 6 weeks ago. Yep.
Congrats, Doc.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Feels good.
So in dental school, you decided you wanted to be a practice owner, and you did a search in the state of North Carolina. What made you decide that that's where you wanted to be?
So I kind of went about applying to dental school different than the mass majority of everyone I heard. I applied to two schools. I applied to Case Western, which was in Northeast Ohio, which was very close to where I was from, and I applied to North Carolina. So that was it. I knew I wanted to go somewhere, again, thinking forward and thinking business-mindedly, if you will, if that's even a word. Essentially, I wanted to go somewhere where I could begin to build contacts. I could begin to build relationships that would be able to last and go beyond the schooling. And I had always had an affinity for North Carolina since a young age as well. So I thought it would be cool. And I thought I was a shoo-in to get in at Case. And I thought North Carolina applying here would just be for fun. And I ended up getting in here, and I didn't get into Case. So.
Oh, okay, so you actually decided you wanted. So what about North Carolina then made you want to go there?
So if anybody knows anything about Northeast Ohio, I'm from the top northeast corner, right on the corner of Lake Erie and Pennsylvania. Winters are about 6 months long. Lake effect snow, which I believe only happens a handful of places in the world. You can have literally 2 feet of snow overnight. So to me, going somewhere where it was warmer, somewhere where maybe I could see my parents, moving someday, just had a lot of appeal. The ocean, the mountains, all kinds of things like that.
Okay, so it was more of a personal fit than more than a sort of business or some sort of logical reason.
Exactly. For the purposes of actually applying to the dental school here was much more of a choice of potentially lifestyle or where I might want to live. Yep.
Okay, so then you decided, so you're in dental school now, and what year did you decide to begin your search for a practice?
So I fought the ortho bug really hard. I probably wouldn't have been in dental school if it wasn't originally for the thought of becoming an orthodontist. And as I struggled emotionally with that, probably all through second year or at least the second half really hard, once I really realized that, I think I would be good at ortho. I think I would like it. But if I came out of this and 20 years from now looked back, if I wasn't simply placing brackets on somebody's teeth, it's not going to hurt my feelings. That wasn't what at the deepest part of me was going to fulfill my goals and desires in life. So probably as essentially the end of second year, moving into the beginning of third year, was when I really made the commitment to pursue general. And the process for me really started over Christmas break, third year.
Okay, so tell me about that process.
Yeah, so what I wanted to do was kind of try to find a way, first of all, that I could differentiate myself a little bit and kind of personalize myself and get myself maybe in front of people that I otherwise wouldn't be able to if I went the normal channels of going through a broker or going through sales reps and those type of people who I had built good relationships with while I was at the school. So what I did was I ended up going on staples.com, and essentially I made what's a rack card, which is, if you would go into any really probably any small business, you think of like Invisalign flyers or those 6 Month Smile, those type of things that maybe somebody has sitting on the front of their counter. And I made this up with a picture of my wife and I on the top, 3 bullet points kind of outlining just very quick what I was looking for. It said, I'm graduating in 2017. I'm looking for a general practice acquisition opportunity, and I'm looking for a complete buyout. It was very quick, short and sweet. It was colored, kind of caught your eye. I kind of put some like little dental decals on there. And on the back of that, I wrote a little letter kind of explaining where I was from and who I was and kind of a little further what I was looking for. And then my wife and I ended up kind of using that as our marketing tool to blast out to different dentists in the state. So we didn't know where we wanted to be. So we knew we wanted to stay in North Carolina, but we don't have any family here. We have obviously friends and contacts we made in school, but upon graduation, that was going to quickly disperse, quickly going to fall apart in a sense, as everybody, went back to their hometowns or the different states where they came from. So we started what we called strategically broad, which was, I know listening to what you did, this was one of the very different phases because you started very micro scale. You knew it kind of exactly where you wanted to be. So
yep, definitely a difference.
Yeah. So I knew kind of how I wanted to reach the docs. The next step was kind of to figure out where I might want to market. So what I did was somehow I convinced my wife to sit down with me over Christmas break, 3rd year. And we did just kind of like a down and dirty demographic analysis of all 100 counties in the state. I had read previous to that the book, I can't remember the exact title, but it's Finding the Perfect Practice Location or The Perfect Practice Location, something like that, from Jamie Amos.
Oh, I read that same book.
Okay, cool. It's a good read. I recommend it, real short and sweet. And I kind of used that in a sense to kind of help guide what I would do. And I made up a Google Doc so my wife could sit down with me, and we pulled census data or North Carolina Bureau of Commerce or something like that. We pulled all the information from there, and we were looking at things such as average age of the population there, median household income, owner occupied housing, the dentist to patient or dentist to population, ratio, all those kind of things, as well as did the population grow in the past? I think it was like 2014 to the present, I think is what the data was from. And then is it projected to grow in the future? That was a huge piece of information, because the area that I come from in Northeast Ohio, at least on a personal level, is pretty deprived. It's been going backwards for a while, and I've had friends, family that have had small businesses, and I've seen them struggle, not because there was competition, but because the area was not very strong, the economics in that area. So I feel like the short answer when you ask somebody, should I practice rural or should I practice in a more urban setting? Everybody says, oh, go rural. That's where all the you can do whatever you want. There's no competition. And well, I had seen that side in a sense from where I came from. So I wanted to be in an area that had growth, and I'd rather be in an area that was maybe a little more populated with dentists, that I could go and compete for the business of the patients there. As opposed to just going in an area where maybe I'm the only doc, but if it's not strong economically, it makes really no difference.
That's a great point. I think that whole idea of going to an area of growth is one that's important, because you're less likely to get a patient from an existing dentist, but somebody who's moving to the area, that's when you can really get that new patient, because they don't have a dentist.
Right.
And so I want to take a step back, Jordan, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So you kind of got this idea that you were going to sit in front of docs, and then you went through the demos. So your demos, you had your, median income, all the stuff that's kind of statistically outside of dentistry, your median income, your owner occupied housing, your median age, and then you said your dentist to population ratio. Can you kind of expand on how you found that and what you did with that number?
Sure. So the way that I found it was simply off of the census data. I don't remember if it came from the federal census data or if it came from the NC Department of Commerce, but there was actually a file heading or a data set that included dentists per 10,000 people.
Wow, really?
Yeah. So I took that, whether it was correct or not, I guess, I don't know how to verify that, but I took that information and used that. So it was kind of given to me in a sense. I know you went much more in depth to figure that out.
Yeah, because you just kind of listed it as one of those things that you had, and for me that was the hardest component to find.
Mm-hmm.
So there was actually a metric, Dennis. Was it like per county or something?
Right. So what I did was I started at the county level. So I started more on a macro scale because we didn't know where we wanted to go. So we were open to finding. Obviously, we want to find somewhere where we would enjoy living, but we were very, very open to the idea that finding the right practice and the right opportunity would hold just as much or maybe even some more weight than simply saying, where do we want to live? So on a county level, I began to, look at these metrics. But yeah, so the dentist per 10,000 people was on a county level.
Okay, so I'm sorry for interrupting you. So you were at the point where you had the demographics and you looked at the counties. And then what did you do from there?
Correct. So in order to just kind of normalize it and move forward from, I have 100 counties now and a bunch of numbers, kind of what do I do? So to normalize it, I gave each heading, I think maybe there was 9 or 10 different data sets, and I gave each one a number 1 or 2. And then what I ended up doing was I got the averages for North Carolina. So, say it was medium household income, whatever the average was for North Carolina. If the county had a higher number than the average, then it got 1 point. And I think with growth, what I did was I gave it 2 points because it was really important to me. And any county that had negative growth in the past few years or negative projected growth was automatically wiped off my list. So I added up all the totals, and then I kind of started to look for, what counties had the greatest potential as a whole instead of just looking at one single number. From there, what I wanted to do was, I know that for me personally, multi-practice ownership is in my future. So I wanted to find areas where, number one, I wanted to limit the risk that I would pick a bad location. So obviously I wanted to have a strong county. But beyond that, I wanted to pick counties that had strong counties around them. So like in the state of North Carolina, in the Northeast, for example, as well as the far west of the state, there's single counties that are very strong. But around that county is poor counties demographically. So what I wanted to do was find individual counties that were strong, but also that were kind of clumped together with other strong counties. So I knew that one, it would limit my risk of picking a single location, but also when I wanted to begin expanding potentially the number of practices that I had, I could hopefully do that at a much closer geographic distance, to where I already work and live. So once I had kind of the counties that I wanted to target, I now kind of knew, what I was going to use. I was going to use the RAT card. I knew kind of where I wanted to market myself. I needed to figure out who I was going to market to, because now I have, just a huge amount of dentists that I could market to. And I began, like pulling up Google, just searching for dentists, and I began initially making this list of all the dentists and the different addresses. And I came across the North Carolina Board of Dental Examiners actually sells a list of every single licensed dentist in the state. It tells you what county they work in. It gives you an address for them. The majority of them had an email address. It tells you the year they graduated. It tells you if they are a specialist. And I was able to use that information to quickly kind of reduce the number of docs that I would market to more focus in on my target market, because I was able to, for example, all the docs that had graduated within the past 5 years, the chances of them having a dental practice and being ready to sell a dental practice was very slim. I knew I didn't want, to go after any specialty practices. So I was able to erase all of these people off of this spreadsheet to come to something that was much more usable, and something that I could use to actually, send these mailers out to, send these rat cards out to.
Our mission at Shared Practices is to help you navigate the path to practice ownership. But one complaint that I've gotten, or one sentiment that I've heard, is that it's a seller's market right now, and it's hard to find practices, and practices fly off the shelf pretty quick. And so people say, like, well, I can't own a practice because I can't find a good practice to buy. Like, I'm willing to go different places. I'm willing to expand my search, but I just can't find good practices. So George has found a way to bring some of these good practices to our attention. So George, share with us what you're doing now with these practices.
So I've reached out to brokers and I've searched nationwide for practice opportunities that fit the criteria that we discuss on the podcast for the kinds of things you're looking for. And so I went ahead and contacted all these brokers, and I got these practices back, and I'm posting them to our listings page on our website in a way that only our listeners will know how to understand based on what we teach in the podcast. And I think it'll highlight the financial opportunities that are out there that other buyers may not notice.
So like things like profitability and hygiene ratios. Do we even have EBITDA on there?
I did EBITDA for every practice that's on there.
Awesome. And if they don't meet certain criteria, we're not going to list them. So we've already done a basic filtering for you. And if there's not a practice on there that's in your area, what are you doing about that, George?
Well, we're still growing. It's definitely a work in progress to get all these opportunities up there. It's definitely a lot of my time. So if there's an area that you're interested in, email me and let me know where you're looking to buy and kind of when. And then I will go out and try to find something for you using our podcast as a ways to getting these practices and posting them online, and then obviously letting you know directly.
Awesome. And as a caveat, you still are going to have to do all of your own due diligence and understand and go through and have these looked at by professionals. But this is definitely providing our listeners with a phenomenal starting point of practices for them to potentially own and make offers on and move into practice ownership a whole lot sooner. So this is awesome. Thank you, George.
You're very welcome. I just thought this was a fantastic way to do a pre-screening and just knock out all of the things that we're not interested in based on what we teach on the podcast and really focus on the specific criteria. And that criteria is posted on that website. So just go to sharedpractices.com, click on practice opportunities on the upper right, and you'll see all of our listings. And the way that they're laid out is by financial information only.
Awesome.
It's crazy listening to your process. It seems like so many of the parts of my process that were extremely tedious, you just found some resource or something that just gave you exactly what I was spending a lot of time finding. Like finding out the age of the doctors, that took me forever. And you just got this PDF that has it all. Man.
Yeah, it was nice.
So listeners, go to North Carolina if you want to do this.
There you go.
So I'm just giving you a hard time, Jordan. I did want to ask you, though, back when you were talking about you put the metrics, the demographics in 1 and 2 columns, were you just looking to make sure that you were going to an area where the median income, all those things was above the state average?
So what I was saying, and I apologize if it was confusing. So I had maybe 9 different headings. So one column would be the projected growth of the county. One column would be the median household income. One column would be the dentist per population or per 10,000 people in that area. So I had 9 different columns. And for each column, I would award that column either 1 point or 2 points. Some of it was whether it got 1 or 2 points. As I had mentioned, to me, it was very, very important that there was growth. So to me, I wanted to give that more weight. So I gave that 2 points. And then what I would do was I would go down that column of the counties, and I would compare that number to the North Carolina average. So say the North Carolina average for median household income was 45,000. If the county had a median household income higher than 45,000, it would get 1 point. And then I would tally up the total points from all the different columns. And that's how I was able to kind of say, this county is better than this county.
So then was it like if it's higher, it's a 1. If it's way higher, it's a 2? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
I only assigned a 2
to growth.
To a couple to growth. And then I think I think the size of the county, like I knew I was looking at a big area being county-wide. So I wanted to make sure I don't remember if it was over 50,000 or over 70,000 people in the county. Like I wanted to at least make sure there was a population there.
Gotcha. Okay, so Jordan, before we get into the list of dentists, the amount of counties that you ended up with after you did this process, what did it look like?
Oh, I don't even remember the exact number. It would probably just be easier to...
Was it just like maybe like 20% of the state or like less than 20% of the state that you were left with?
I'd say, yeah, 20% is probably a good roundabout estimate. It ended up being, once I took the list of docs and, every county that I wasn't marketing to, if a doc worked in that county, obviously they were taken off the list. I actually ended up sending mailers out to 1,800 dentists. So my wife and I hand wrote out 1,800 addresses on envelopes.
My goodness. Oh my gosh. So were the big cities in that, like Raleigh, or I'm not too familiar with North Carolina, but...
Yeah, so it included the kind of the big 3, Raleigh, Durham, Charlotte, Greensboro. Yeah, so the big cities fell in there. Yeah.
Okay. So your only criteria for the dentist were they had to be in a selected county and that they had to be graduated more than 5 years ago.
Selected county, more than 5 years ago, non-specialty. I went through and I took away anybody that was academic, public health, but beyond that, yeah, it was. Well, I also went through because there was, there's a lot of group practices, so a lot of docs had the same address. So I went through the list, and if I saw a doc that had the same address, I would go to their website and I would try to figure out, well, who's the first doc listed, or who does it say is the owner, and I would only send it to them and not to the associates.
Okay. And so then you took your list down to 1,800 with that criteria.
Correct. I think the original list, there's like 5,000 or 5,500, somewhere in that ballpark, dentists in North Carolina.
Okay, so then you took it, so you sent about mailers to about 20% of the dentists then?
Yeah.
Okay.
That'd probably be about right.
That's crazy. Wow. I mean, not in a bad way. That's impressive. That's so many dentists that you hand wrote letters to. So you sent out 1,800, and that was out over that Christmas break?
Yeah, so just after the first of the year, we sent them out.
And how long did that analysis take you?
To put together the county-wide analysis?
Yeah, from the time that you had the idea to the time you had the list of dentists with addresses, how long did that take you?
I put together everything in that semester. I was able to put the rat card together and was able to put together over probably the course of like 3 days, since I had my wife's help, since we were essentially just data mining, pulling up the different counties, census data and putting them into the Google Excel spreadsheet. And then, I ordered the list. I had to pay, I think it was $100 for the list. Came within a week or two. And actually just kind of breaking the list down of docs took a significant amount of time to make sure, I wasn't sending it to people I didn't want to, because every rat card, costs money. An envelope costs money. A stamp costs money. So I didn't want to just send them out, willy-nilly, if you will, to just people that I didn't think would even consider what I was doing.
Okay, so let's just, let's jump to the point where you sent them out. By the way, probably costs around, am I guessing $1,000? Is that what the mailing cost you around there?
Well, yeah, because it was about 50 cents. It was about 50. I think it was 49 cents a stamp at the time.
Yeah, and that was probably the main. Okay, so you go and you send out that mailer, and what was the response like?
So what I did was I sent out the mailer, and within probably 2 weeks started having responses come in. And then the plan all along, since I had that list and I had a huge amount of emails from that list, the plan was following that, so 4 weeks later from sending out the mailing, I wanted to do an email blast with a PDF of the RAC card. And I also included a lot of the docs that I had taken out. They still needed to be in the same counties, but a lot of like the younger docs or the associates that I had taken out, I included them in the email blast, since essentially, it was just the push of a button.
Yeah.
So the numbers that I ended up with, I had about 80 responses. And what I mean by responses is people reaching out in some capacity. So there was a few people who actually reached out just to say, sorry, I don't have a practice. This is pretty cool. If I can help you in any way, let me know. I had a couple people reach out and offer me associate positions. I had a couple negative people, reach out and say, take me off the mailing list, or you are, invading our privacy and kind of stuff like that. But it came out to around maybe 60 of those 80-ish that were actually interested in talking to me in some capacity about some type of transition.
So that must have taken a huge chunk of your time. I mean, 60 people, those conversations aren't quick.
It was, oh man, it was a massive amount of time and organization, and the spring semester third year was the easiest semester we had to date, where clinic really jumped up, classwork had dropped pretty significantly, so studying had dropped, and a lot of my classmates were just, they kept saying, oh, we have so much time, and we're, doing, a lot more leisurely things that we like to do. And that semester for me was just almost every single night I'd be coming home and scheduling conversations, because obviously I was looking over a broad geographic area. So it would be impossible, number one, for me to drive to all of these different places of the docs who were interested. But beyond that, it just would have been a gross waste of time. So what I wanted to do was have a conversation with everybody on the phone, that was interested in talking, to see if they might be a potential. And if it weren't, I would respectfully, decline and tell them, if there's any way that I can help you, let me know. But yeah, it was a lot. I mean, it was not uncommon for me to be on the phone with one person for over an hour. Yeah. So it was a lot. It was a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've only done it once, as my podcast said, I was 1-for-1, I guess.
Right.
But that took a long time. And, I can't even imagine 60.
Yeah. And I probably didn't, I wasn't necessarily on the phone with all 60. My goal through all of it, because as I had mentioned, I had sent out an email blast as well. So some of them came in as emails, and I could tell right from the start that it wasn't going to be a good fit, or maybe it wasn't what I was looking for. Somebody had reached out and said, I'm very interested in talking with you. I'm looking to sell my practice in 9 years. For me, I knew that was way beyond what I was interested in doing. But the goal for me through all of this was, I wanted to respond to every single response that came into me. I wanted to thank them for their time and express my gratitude for their interest.
That's nice. I guess I should have probably prefaced with this, but can you kind of tell our listeners about what you were looking for in an opportunity before we dive into the specific ones?
Yeah, sure. So it molded somewhat, as I began to see what opportunities were available, and as I began to kind of learn, what was realistic and what was not. But my ideal probably from the beginning was a practice big enough that would allow my wife to come in and work from day one. It wasn't a non-negotiable. Ashley and I had discussed, if we find the right practice, but it's not big enough or it doesn't have the opportunity for her to come right in the hygiene department, that we would still do it and just work her in when we could. But number one was so that she could work.
Do you have a revenue size in mind for that?
Well, not necessarily for the hygiene portion, because, it could be, you could have a practice, a very small practice, maybe that their hygienist was retiring, or, maybe they were small, but their hygiene was strong enough that they needed another hygienist. So it wasn't necessarily a revenue size, but I was looking in my kind of ideal list or perfect scenario for a practice. I was hoping for one with an associate, where I could either walk into that associate's position and they leave, or potentially it would be big enough that the associate could stay when I bought the practice. So
that's smart.
From that standpoint, in an ideal scenario, it would be over $1 million, because essentially, if you'll hear different people say different things, but a lot of times people will say, you shouldn't consider an associate until maybe 800,000-900,000, maybe $1 million, or the practice just isn't going to be big enough. So to consider, a practice big enough and healthy enough to have an associate, I was hoping for something over $1 million.
Okay, and then what transition did you have in mind?
So the way I had presented the RAC card and kind of began the search was a short-term associateship followed by the complete purchase. And by short-term, when I was originally talking with the docs, I defined as maybe the perfect scenario being 12 months or less. The reason that I had come up with the 12 months or less, so maybe let's just say 6 to 12 months, is because if I was able to find a practice of the size that I was hoping for, in order to, one, clinically be able to handle the practice, if I ended up being the only doc or the primary producer in the practice, clinically coming right out of school, I needed to consider, am I going to be ready for that? And from a financial side, I had talked with a handful of banks, and essentially what they expressed was there's this kind of magic number of 12 months. And once you hit this 12-month mark, you are considered, or you are looked at, if you will, very similarly to a doc who's been practicing 5, 10, or more years, in the sense where before the 12-month mark, there are a select few, but before the 12-month mark, many banks won't loan more than maybe like $350,000. But as soon as you hit that 12-month mark, they'll maybe go to $1.2 million. So I knew that I wanted to kind of set myself up for success. I wanted to aggressively move towards practice ownership, but I wanted to do it responsibly. So those were kind of the criteria that kind of helped me define my time frame. Now, I ran into a couple situations where, one of the practices that I actually considered and was kind of high on the list for a little while was a satellite practice from a doc, much smaller, that I probably could have handled right from the start, and it would have been really a purchase right out of school. Excuse me if I would have went that route, but that wasn't necessarily what I was looking for from the beginning.
Okay, and Jordan, did you have in mind when you would have the purchase agreement and all that paperwork done? Were you kind of big on having it done before you stepped foot in the practice?
I was extremely big on that, although my viewpoint has changed. I won't say drastically, but it's changed significantly, and I'll kind of explain. So my goal from the very beginning was to find a practice. The idea is if you can find a practice that you can walk into that you intend to buy, it's kind of like a very long due diligence period. You're able to be in this practice for maybe several months to see the ins and outs, to see it much more intimately, to see how it works, to hear how the employees talk to patients, to see how you communicate and how you get along with the employees, to see is there issues with the equipment, all these things that really would be impossible to truly know if you didn't work there.
Absolutely.
So I just lost my train of thought. I don't even know where I was.
Oh, sorry.
What was the question?
I was asking you about your ideal transition period. And then you talked about entering the practice and then finding out things that you wouldn't be able to find out through due diligence. And then we talked about how you would be able to have the paperwork in advance or not.
Oh, that's right. It was the contract stuff. That's right. So the goal was for me to find a place, if you could be in the practice, then you could have this long-term due diligence period. But what this would allow you to do is if you could go in there and have all of the paperwork lined out, you could have all of the purchase price, everything figured out and in a contract, that would allow you to avoid when you hop on Dental Town or sometimes you talk to different docs, they say so many times an associate will go into a practice and be promised something that they won't end up getting. So maybe a doc will say, oh yeah, come associate for me for a while, and I'll let you buy the practice, or I'll let you partner after X amount of years or time, whatever that may be. And then that doesn't end up happening. So I was like, I don't want to go into a situation. I don't want to spend all of this time and go into a practice, because if I go into it with the intention to buy it, I'm going to have an ownership mentality. I'm going to be, busting myself as hard as I can to make it grow on there and those kind of things. So that was my intentions, to go in with all of the contracts, asset purchase agreement signed, with everything in place. When I kind of got to the point where I knew I'd found the practice that I was going to pursue pretty heavily, and we got to kind of talking about the contract side and the legal side. When I was talking with my lawyer, I was kind of explaining this concept to her, that I wanted to have the asset purchase agreement done up front before I even step foot in it, so there's no ambiguity in what's happening. There's no uncertainty. We know that, within this amount of time frame or on this date, we're going to buy it. We know what the purchase price is going to be. And she kind of stopped me and she said, Jordan, we can do that, but have you thought about what it means if you need to actually use the legal document? Meaning, if the selling doc signs this contract saying, I'm going to sell this practice to you for this amount of money on this date, etc., and then while I'm associating there, he decides not to sell it to me, or he decides he doesn't want to sell it anymore, I can force him to sell the practice. But what does that do for goodwill? What does that do, in the situation that I have found myself in? I'm hoping to have a long-term relationship with the doc where he's actually going to switch places with me and associate for me for a while. I don't want to force anybody to do anything. So it would have really ended up, if I would have had to exercise the contract, it could have been a disaster. He could essentially, destroy me, if you will, or destroy the deal. So
I never thought about that. Wow. Yeah. That's a great point.
Yeah, I hadn't either, because I had went a year and a half with the intentions of having the asset purchase agreement all completed. And then when she told that to me, I was like, wow, I've never really thought about that, because this needs to be a win-win on both sides, because he needs to sell me. I want him to be there to produce for me. I don't want this to fall apart. So essentially what we ended up doing, and then she also recommended, well, if you want to, you can just do a letter of intent. And what that would be, I said, okay, well, if I do a letter of intent, does that bind him to anything? And she said, no, a letter of intent is we can do as detailed or as concise as you'd like, but it essentially is just going to highlight out the different main pieces to the transaction. But if they decided that they didn't want to sell, then, it doesn't bind them to sell. That would have been the asset purchase agreement, and we're back to the concept of forcing them to sell. So I kind of, pivoted pretty hard, and I actually didn't end up doing an asset purchase agreement or a letter of intent, because it was going to cost thousands of dollars for me to pay to do that, where I had spent hours and hours and hours with the selling doc going over, all of the different pieces, at least the main pieces, talking about what the purchase price would be, and if we see any growth in the next 6 months when I go in there, is the purchase price going to change, and what will the non-compete range be, and talking about these big hot button points that could potentially derail a deal. And we came to a point verbally that, we're on the same page with all of those major things. So I just didn't feel like, especially, I'm not working yet. A lawyer, at least the one I was or am using, is $300 an hour. So I didn't actually end up doing either of those, which a year and a half ago, if you would have asked me if I would do a deal without doing that, I would have said you're crazy.
Yeah, I can understand that pivot concept. There's a couple things in my process that I pivoted on, pretty significantly. Also, I did go through with the LOI, and I did get that done, which but it never got signed. So I'm also on a verbal agreement, and so I get that, and I understand. I definitely think you made a wise decision.
Yeah, I think the letter of intent can be, I think it can be a very, very strong asset for somebody who maybe is a little more reserved in pushing with the seller doc to figure out the hot button items. It allows your lawyer to, in a sense, do some of that for you. I need to ask you about the non-compete because my lawyer needs it for the letter of intent. I think it can maybe help the conversation be easier, but I'm a pretty outspoken person. I'm a pretty upfront person. So I was able to kind of go over all those things with the doc myself. So I just felt like I had what I needed.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I remember when I first heard that 20% of your patients, no matter what you do, are probably not going to accept treatment. Another 20% probably will, just because they're inherently trusting and believe in dentistry. And it's the 60% in between that we kind of have to work with. Just knowing that 20% exists that isn't going to accept treatment actually makes me feel a whole lot better about presenting treatment and getting shot down sometimes. This course from Spear Education, called Filtering Patients into Your Dental Practice by Dr. Gary DeWood, goes into this idea of treating patients differently based on their needs and who they are.
The SPEAR model encompasses understanding that patients come to us for different reasons and with very different expectations. Treating everyone the same actually is one of the greatest inequalities that there can be, because people are not the same. In fact, in a business, if everyone was treated exactly the same, we would have one product to offer. The SPEAR model, remember, is a pyramid. And in the pyramid, we have groups of patients. Our first group is a reactive group of patients.
To understand how to better filter patients into your dental practice, go to speareducation.com and take this course. Sign up for an extended guest pass by mentioning the Shared Practices podcast and use the promo code LOW, LOW200, LOW200 for $200 off your annual membership.
And Jordan, I feel like I'm missing a big part of the story here that I got to ask you about. So,
Sure.
What was the process like so we talked about the response level. Now, how many practices did you seriously consider? How many did you visit? Kind of tell us about that process and how you ended up deciding on the one that you're going with.
Yeah, so that's a big hole in the story, right? So we ended up meeting with, I think it was around 20 doctors.
Okay.
And probably 18 or 19 of those at their practice. So we ended up spending the next probably 8 or 9 months in and out of school, just trying to find time on the weekends to go visit these practices. And, we would go visit the practice, meet with the doc. We would kind of check out the area. We would generally go, stay in a hotel so that we could have one day to meet with the doc and the next day, just simple things because we needed to consider the business side. And, is this a place we'd want to live? So just simple things like, let's go to the mall. Like, is there a movie theater around? Like, is it really busy? Is it really crowded? Does it look very sad and tired? I mean, there was a couple places where as we were driving in to the, visit the practice, we could instantly tell like this is just not going to work. So as we began to visit the different practices, some eliminated themselves immediately, but the mass majority, we had some really, really great visits and a lot of really, really great opportunities presented themselves.
So of the 20 that you visited, how many would you say were knocked off right away, and how many would you say you guys seriously considered?
There was probably maybe 3 or 5 that, we just knew right away it wasn't going to be a good fit. And I'll define seriously considered as putting in serious thought and emotional time into considering them. And I say I'm defining it that way because once I decided that my number one practice, which is the practice that I'm ending up at, was at the top of my list, to seriously consider it was to do a full practice evaluation, bring in an accountant, look at all the numbers, all the tax returns, all the data that I possibly could, And I didn't do that, on a bunch of different practices. Again, time-wise, financially-wise, it just wouldn't have made sense. So it was a different level of seriously considered, if you will. But there was a lot that we, really deliberated over to try to figure out, can we live here? What would it look like to work with this doctor? And the opportunities were so, there were so many opportunities that were so different. It really made us consider, what we actually wanted and what would be the best for us.
And Jordan, one point you haven't touched on that I think is really important, and I'm sure you thought about it, is the seller to doc's personality. And because this is a long-term relationship, it's like a four-year thing,
Sure.
So how did that, were there any abrasive docs? Were there any that you just really liked? How did that work?
I wouldn't say any abrasive docs, but that was a big piece that we considered from the very beginning, as we would go in and try to start building relationships with these docs. We would ask them kind of, what does it look like in your practice? Do you run the practice, or does the staff run the practice? Because there was a couple docs who were like, look, I told my staff, I just want to come in and do dentistry. You guys handle, the front desk stuff, and you guys handle whatever. Like, if you really need me, let me know. But I just want to do dentistry and leave, and I'm not that hands off. I'm going to be much more involved than that. And I would ask them, what's the atmosphere in the practice? Do you guys joke around? Do you guys, is it very serious? When we're working, it's business time, and there's, no conversations going on. So we can consider those kind of things, because if you would go in and have a very stark, different personality, and me being, I'm a little more outgoing and talkative and loud and those kind of things. So yeah, there was one or two docs who were, really quiet and reserved. And it was definitely a concern that, how am I going to fit into that setting? Okay.
And so now you talked about the one practice that you were very seriously considering. You hired, representation. So what about that practice made it number one?
So I would say probably, and I don't know what you had found in your region of the country, but the average practice in North Carolina, and I would guess the country, is a 4 or 5 op practice with one doctor and 1 or 2 hygiene. And the majority of the practices that we visited were that way. So there was only a few practices that I visited that were big enough, or that were big enough to have associates or already had associates. Number one, from a production standpoint, but number two, from a facility standpoint. I knew that, with a lot of these practices, it's kind of like the old silly saying where when you break up with somebody, you say, it's not you, it's me. A lot of these opportunities were amazing opportunities if all I wanted to do was, not all, I don't want to discount this in any way, but just for me it's different. But if all I wanted to do was go in and have one practice and work in that practice for the next 30 years, and that would be it. That's not what I desire. I wanted to be able to go into a practice, have the ability to grow the practice, have the ability to have an associate come in so that potentially I can, still work there, but potentially be able to consider other opportunities. So the practice that I'm actually stepping foot in now was one of the bigger practices. It has 8 ops, one of the bigger practices facility-wise and production-wise. So it also has the opportunity for Ashley to step in from day one in the hygiene department. And on the most basic level from the analysis side, if we would go in, the finances and the financial situation is strong enough such that if, looking as conservatively as possible, when Ashley and I go in, if we had 0 growth and we kept everything exactly the same and continued to employ the doc and all the other staff and everything, we're still able to pay the note, so cover the debt service and make a little bit of money. And that's without any growth in adding Ashley and I.
So what you're saying is that size really mattered for you.
Ideally, yes. Size, yes. We'll just leave it there.
I'm just giving you a hard time, Jordan.
I know.
So anyway, did you wish that kind of looking at these opportunities, you maybe asked them like, how many ops do you have? I'm sure you did, but do you wish that you maybe more seriously considered it before you drove out to all these locations?
In the beginning, I didn't know maybe how important that was to me. Like I said, I mean, and I think you had mentioned in your search as well, you
Yeah,
kind of
mine was
make
6 was the
this
floor.
right. You kind of make this ideal list or this wish list, but I wanted to be extremely open to whatever presented itself. I wanted to be very, very careful. And actually, the practice that we're going into wasn't the top of my list for a while. I mean, it's not the most up to date practice that I went into. You know, there's a few things where other practices just looked more appealing in some aspects. So I wanted to be very, very open. So no, I don't regret going into some of these other practices at all. I mean, to be able to go in and meet so many docs and see how they set up things and see how they operate. It was a priceless opportunity, really.
Did you shadow any of these guys?
I did not.
Okay, so it was all after hours.
Yeah, all Fridays or weekends for the most part. Yeah.
Okay, so now you haven't actually stepped foot in the practice yet, but you have your practice selected. You guys have agreed on everything. Tell me a little bit about the practice. I feel like so much build up.
As I kind of mentioned, so I haven't stepped foot in as started working. So I had a new baby arrive 3 weeks ago. So I decided to take 5 weeks. I thought it would be the only time kind of in my life probably that I would be able to do this. So some of my friends have started working, and I've been loving my time here at home, but just been itching like crazy to get going. So I start here in about a week and a half. Practice has 8 ops. There is the senior doc. There is a part-time associate. So I'm going to be going in and taking the spot essentially of the part-time associate. I'm going to be full-time, but that associate won't be there anymore. So that'll be at least some production there, some patient base there for me to step into. It's a practice that it's a standalone building, a beautiful brick building, nice curb appeal. It just proved to be a practice that we could go into and, if we're successful, have the opportunity to grow.
And then what about the town? What's the town like?
So the town it's not a Raleigh or a Charlotte or a Durham. I would say it's a mid-size area. So within the 3-mile radius, I think there's 50,000 people. So not massive, but it's a nice size. We weren't afraid of small or semi-small as long as there was potential there.
Okay. And then going through this whole process, we're wrapping up our interview here. Do you have any advice for somebody who's listening to this, who's going to go through that same thing that you learned?
I would say, don't be afraid to look for opportunities that are out there. So I had 2 classmates who kind of took this idea and, altered it a little bit to make it their own. And they both have found practices, and they both actually had much better statistical success with their response rates than I did. And they've found opportunities that you would not find otherwise. Now, there may be other solutions to finding those, but if you just simply go the basic channels and go through a broker or, just go through a supply rep or whatever, these opportunities never would have presented themselves because 99% of these practices were not on the market. They were not for sale. The doc said I was the only person they've talked to about it. They hadn't talked to another potential buyer. They hadn't talked to their accountants. They just weren't available if I hadn't, taken the extra effort to kind of put myself out there. And there was some fear, I was spending money on this, time on this. And, I originally told Ashley, I said, if we get 10 responses and 2 of them are potentials, maybe 1 of them works out, it will have been worth it. And it far surpassed that. So it was, just go out there and do it. Get creative, differentiate yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything you've said. I went through a similar experience. and off-market opportunities are out there. They just need to be found, and I really do appreciate you, Jordan. Do you mind if we share your card with our listeners?
Sure. No, that'd be fine. Yeah, I can give you the PDF.
Okay, so we'll put that in our show notes for anybody who's interested. And then, Jordan, we really enjoyed having you on. That was awesome. Good luck on everything, and hopefully we can see how you're doing in a bit, okay?
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I was totally unfair to Jordan's method because I asked you before our listeners had even listened whose method was better. And I think if you're looking at the time that you have to put in and the output, the end, I think Jordan wins.
Yeah, I won't say that, but
you won't agree. Okay, fine.
No, but I mean, in all fairness, and I told him off air, I was really impressed with his method and the practice. When we kind of stopped recording, we started talking a little bit more honestly about everything, and I was extremely impressed with his search and everything he found, and it's definitely a very viable method I'd recommend everybody use.
No, and we'll talk about that when we do our ownership accelerator. We're going to have an entire kind of course around this idea of off-market deals and how to find them and how to do direct mail and email to contact and find these practices, because it's genius. The first time I heard about it was from Dr. Brady Frank, and to hear like our generation, our graduating classes and people who are at our same level do the same thing and have success is really exciting, which is why you decided to bring on our interview guest for next week. So tell us a little bit about that as a little sneak preview.
I will. And Richard, real quick, I forgot to mention this in the intro, that we have Jordan has been nice enough to attach his rack cart that he sends to all those dentists.
Awesome.
And so we have that as an episode resource for today. And on that same topic, another individual who had that resource from Jordan, actually introduced me to Jordan, is my classmate, Ike Erling. And he used that same technique and found himself a great opportunity. So if you want to see how you use Jordan's and how you take it from finding the practice to closing the deal, that's definitely next week with Ike Erling.
Well, and he got the best of both worlds because he got you and Jordan. So he cheated, I think. Ike did.
Yeah, and I think he offers some great perspective on the different when to use whose method. I think he had a really great insight on that. So next week, you'll really enjoy that part of the episode.
Awesome. In the meantime, if you guys haven't had the chance to, please leave us a review on iTunes. It really helps people find the show and trust that we're worth downloading. And also join us on Facebook on the Shared Practices group. It's a private group. So if you jump on there, request, we'll add you if we can tell that you're actually a dentist looking to buy and practice. So talk to you next week on the Shared Practices podcast. See ya.